Hello, everyone, and welcome to Exploring the Origins of the Wuhan Coronavirus. This is our live panel at the Epoch Times looking at this hit film that we've just put out that's garnered over 70 million views across YouTube, Facebook, and a variety of other channels, tracking down the origin of Wuhan coronavirus. We're here today with a panel of experts. We've got Dr. Sean Lin. He's one of the experts in the documentary, former lab director for viral diseases branch at the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research. We've got Dr. Joe Wang. Dr. Joe Wang is the president of NTD Canada. Back in the day, he spearheaded SARS vaccine development at one of the largest vaccine companies in the world. And of course, we've also got Joshua Philipp, who is, of course, the star investigative reporter who started this whole thing, who started digging. And myself, I'm Jan Jekielek, the host of American Thought Leaders and senior editor at the Epoch Times. Dr. Wang, what are the actual possibilities around this origin?
To your question, I think there are 5 possibilities. Number one, the virus might have occurred naturally, developing an animal host and then jumped to humans in somewhere around November last year. And the second scenario is that the jump actually happened earlier than November last year from animal to human, and the virus involved within human body for a period of time, gained something we call the gain of function, so that the virus can jump from human to human transfer. So this function was gained within the human body of the virus in evolution. So that's the scenario number 2. Number 3. There are a lot of biological labs with virus in their storage, and the culture of different viruses exists in all over the world in lab setting, and maybe some culture escaped and started infecting people. That's scenario number 3. Scenario number 4 is that we know that scientists around the world are trying to develop vaccines against different pathogens, for instance, HIV or SARS or other things, and they use virus as a vector. So this kind of constructs may have escaped from the lab setting and started to infect people. So this scenario number 4 would be, it's a byproduct of genetic engineering, but the purpose was benign. The last scenario is bioweapon development. Of course, this is regarded as a conspiracy theories, so it probably for another discussion, but. This virus we know didn't just fall from the sky. It came from somewhere, and with more than 150 people killed by this virus, this is really tragic that the human race have never seen before. It demands the scientific community to look at all possibilities.
I'm going to take a question from our audiences here, and this is going to, I think, to go to Dr. Lin. The question is from Hale State McQueen. Is it true that SARS-CoV-2 contains sequences of HIV and Ebola? If so, why aren't we hearing more about that? Seems like the odds of that happening naturally are next to nothing. Would certainly mean that it was engineered. Dr. Lin.
Okay. Thank you, Yang, for inviting me to this panel. So I think a quick summary is that I think the origin of the virus is still mysterious.
It was working during the pre-call.
it's really a mysterious, one of the biggest mysterious story right now. So I did see report mentioned about people being seeing GP120, one of the glycoproteins sequence uh, in the SARS-CoV-2's S proteins, but I haven't seen report talking about Ebola sequence in a SARS-CoV-2 sequence. But overall, I think right now very little evidence to prove that, because most of these studies try to comparing different virus sequence. Sometimes you're using big blast and you identify a sequence maybe showing homology to HIV's GP120, the envelope protein. Some people said part of the GP1, the GP41 is also there. But however, I think through this kind of blast and alignment, sometimes you got a lot of viral protein sequence can align together, and it depends on the homology percentage. And so it's hard to be a solid evidence. Say, all right, you got this other virus insert into the SARS-CoV-2. So this part, I think, still it's hard to be a solid evidence.
Guys,
And meanwhile, I want to mention a couple of reports.
The technical staff talking.
Yeah, I want to mention a couple of reports mentioning they study about the animal origin of the virus. So one report is on Nature Medicine. They study about the title is Proximal Origin of the SARS-CoV-2. This is done by a research group in the Scripps Institute, led by Christian Anderson. So in this paper, she highlighted the receptor binding domain in spike protein of the SARS-CoV-2. And he mentioned there are 5 important amino acids actually showing optimal binding to the receptor, ACE2 receptor. However, they argue that this binding affinity is not an ideal one as predicted by the computer model. So they're thinking that if, the rationale basically is that if it is a lab engineer, there should be an ideal binding, not just an optimized binding. So this is one argument, but I think this argument has some flaws in their rationale, because the receptor and spike protein binding just an initial step, and there are many factors that influence the virus fusion and entry. And also, they mentioned about if it's a lab engineered virus, and then it should use some of the current reverse engineering systems. And they cited a reference, actually was in 2014. But when I look at those review articles, they mentioned about 3 reverse engineering systems. But when I check Dr. Shi Zhenli at the Wuhan Institute of Virology's lab, checking on her previous publication, I actually saw, even just on 2016, she had actually upgraded part of her reverse engineering system too. From, for example, on the in vitro ligation system, she upgraded from 6 segment to 8 segments system. So basically, as long as the lab is working on this gain of function study or on the reverse genetic studies on coronavirus, the system can always evolve. So I think that rationale from the Scripps Institute's paper is still flawed. And also, I want to mention the key issue here. Most people thinking about lab engineered virus, primarily thinking, all right, I'm kind of like doing different matching process. I can put different pieces together. But actually, one of the biggest lab engineered process is called animal selection, and plus in vitro selection. So, for example, if you put the virus, maybe it's a natural generated virus. If you put into an animal model and do serial passages, at each round of passage, I select an even higher pathogenicity for the virus, then I can get a very strong pathogenic virus after, for example, a dozen rounds or even 20 rounds of passage. And even as early as 2007, similar kind of gain of function study was already established for coronavirus. So for this kind of gain of function study in an animal model, it's very hard to track whether it's from different segments to see whether it's lab engineered, because it can use a wild type virus, but after through intentional passaging, it's also manipulated. So in this way, it's very hard to track these, from the end product to see whether it is engineered. Because when the virus replicates quickly in the animal host, its sequence can be mutated quickly and also get selected, intentionally humanly selected for higher pathogenic ones. So that's why I think this is also a biggest flaw in that paper's rationale. You cannot exclude this possibility. And so simply based on gene sequence alignment and homology analysis is not enough to prove whether a product is lab produced or not.
Oh,
So
that's very fascinating, actually, and I can't help but think, you mentioned virologist Dr. Shijeng Li, which is actually featured in this documentary prominently, and we have a question from one of our audience, and I'll actually give this to Josh. Wei Bin 88 asks, the best question is, where is virologist Shijeng Li, the Batwoman of China?
Yeah, so this Batwoman of China, this doctor, she was one of the world-renowned, world-famous bat coronavirus researchers. And during the time when you would expect the Chinese Communist Party to put her front and center as the #1 propaganda, figure of representing the Chinese Communist Party's advanced research coming to save the world, and they're doing all this masked diplomacy and trying to promote themselves as having the China model, this totalitarian communist system, as being the most effective in combating the virus, which is what the narrative they're spreading is. You would think they would take her out and show her around and say, look at the research she's been doing. It's going to save all of us. And she is dead quiet. That laboratory in China is dead quiet, despite the fact that they were researching viruses just like this. At all possible times, in any normal circumstance, would be the time that the Chinese Communist Party would use this front and center in all of their propaganda, and we're hearing nothing from them. And so for me, this is something, say, an indicator, something to look at that does suggest something weird is going on when it comes to that laboratory. Why are they keeping it quiet? Why are they all quiet?
That's actually incredibly interesting and speaks to another question. Our audiences are very, very in tune with what we've done here, I think. So recently there have been these reports, and I think I'll pass this question on to Dr. Wang. Recently there have been media reports about the State Department cables. I think this was Josh Rogan in the Washington Post talking about safety concerns at precisely this lab, the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Do you share these concerns? Where are we at here?
Well, I would love to see evidence showing that there is no lab origin of this novel coronavirus. I actually wrote to Dr. Anderson at the Scripps Institute in California, basically asking for evidence that his conclusion that this virus didn't come from a lab, because his people didn't give us the evidence. So I don't want to hear that somebody actually made this that caused so many people die from it. But we cannot afford not asking this question if the evidence doesn't show it. So basically, the State Department diplomatic cable, they're based on information that we in the public don't really have. But what we have is that the virologists in that Wuhan Institute, Dr. Shijeng Li and her colleagues, have been manipulating coronaviruses. That's the fact that we know, and they have published extensively on their research. This is fact number one. Fact number two is that we knew that Chinese labs have leaked. So some viruses have escaped from the lab setting. For instance, in 2004, SARS virus have escaped labs in Beijing. That's very well documented. So putting these two together with some information, maybe the diplomatic people have access that we don't have, it's very reasonable to ask the question. So can we look at the lab? Why not? This is like a red line from the scientific community that we somehow it's not politically correct, or it's a red zone that we cannot go in. But we just have to ask this question.
I'm just thinking, I'm going to volley a question over to Josh right now. Something that's really important, and I've seen this conflated a lot in a lot of journalistic pieces and so forth, the idea of lab origin and the idea of engineered. People kind of use them interchangeably, but I know we don't see it that way. I wonder if you could break that down for us, Josh.
Yeah, no, we don't see it that way at all. Honestly, in my personal analysis, based on the research from this documentary, I do not think this is a man-made virus. Just because I think it is not a man-made virus, though, doesn't mean I'm not going to show other evidence suggesting otherwise. The fact is that they were making chimeric viruses there. They were doing experiments with which Dr. Shanlin noted at that laboratory. They did have these programs. I'm not going to write that off just because I don't agree that that may be the origin of it. At the same time, yes, just because it came from, just saying it came from a lab does not mean that it's man-made. These two should not be conflated. And frankly, I think it's disingenuous that a lot of journalists are trying to conflate the two, to discredit the idea that it may have come from this laboratory at a time when the world needs answers. And frankly, when in any normal circumstance, as Dr. Wang noted, this should be the main place we started looking. This should be the first place we started looking. And allegedly in China, this was the first place the Chinese Communist Party started looking when news came out of a virus escaping. So why is the rest of the world seemingly quiet on that possibility? Why is this not being taken seriously? But I guess given, saying that now, it does seem to be the case that after we publish this documentary, at least, other articles came out suggesting that it may have come from this laboratory. It is now being seen as a real possibility. But again, yes, coming from that lab does not mean it was necessarily man-made, because as Dr. Shi's papers in the past noted, which were public, she was traveling all around the world and collecting bat coronaviruses from every corner of the world. And so that laboratory had these viruses there.
Dr. Lin, do you think this whole wet market story, based on the progression of events that Josh uncovered and related whatever scientific information is available, is it some kind of cover story, as increasing number of people now are suggesting?
Yeah, I think the wet market stories, initially the Chinese government heavily emphasized about their potential. But I think based on the science report first, there's report mentioning at least 14 out of 41 cases of the early cases in December and early January, they were not related to the Huanan seafood market. So and also now tracking back to earlier cases in November and early December, those patients had nothing to do with Huanan seafood market. So basically, that means these stories are probably just a smoke. Then I think this question deals with the basic issue about what is the animal reservoir or intermediate animal host for this virus, because most people think that this is outbreak come from a zoonotic exchange from one animal or two different animals to humans, right? So this is the biggest question. And so these also have two aspects. One is why the Chinese government, especially local Wuhan CDC, they did not collect the animal samples in Wuhan area, not just in the Huanan seafood market. Because even if you mistakenly close down the Huanan seafood market, but there are other seafood markets in Wuhan too. And why don't you collect animal samples and give rounds of testing to identify which animal might have the virus? And actually, recently I saw a report from Dr. Zhenli's group. They published it in late March, mentioning they identified SARS-CoV-2 in domestic cats, right? And what's more bizarre is that they designed this experiment in January. And so they started collecting the cat samples in January. but you didn't see any alarm sent to the public. So as a scientist, you know the risk that the coronavirus may infect some domestic cats and rodents as well. Why don't you quickly collect those samples in January and do a quick testing and tell the public? And instead, you design a study, it takes 2-3 months to publish, and you didn't give any warning for the public, right? Because many individuals in Wuhan may be carrying these cats as pets, right? Will they be infected by sick cats, right? So it's a risk there. The scientists didn't do that. So this is one big issue about about this animal reservoir. And then also regarding about potential animal intermediate host, right? So there are reports mentioned about pangolin, maybe the reservoir. The most recent report is by Dr. Guang Yi's group from Hong Kong. I think that was a really nice article because his group identified the pangolin coronavirus showing high homology to the SARS-CoV-2. Now that also has a question. Those samples actually was obtained in the anti-smuggling operation from 2017 to 2018, right? So there's no animal sample collected during this pandemic, either in Guangdong or even in Wuhan, and no result proving that currently any sick pangolin carrying the virus. Now, that's really weird, because if we look back into SARS, when we identify civets, the palm civet as an intermediate animal host, during that time, you identify several strains of that virus in civets. There are strains showing low infectivity, low binding affinity to the receptors, and there are intermediate type, and there are high affinity and high infectivity types. So you can see probably the virus mutated in the animal too, right? Gradually reach a higher infectivity. But for this SARS-CoV-2, we never see any real animal testing sample results from Guangdong, from any part of the China to identify any animals during the last 3-4 months. It's been testing positive as for SARS-CoV, and only when we see a report from the Jekielek group, we suddenly see, oh, cats can carry the virus. So this is really real. And also it's malfeasance, at least a malfeasance, if I'm not mentioning covering up about the investigation on animal samples.
Dr. Wang, actually, there's another question here from a viewer, Perma Sherpa, and I'm just thinking back to the fact that I happen to know that you are from rural China yourself originally. And the question is actually about the wet markets. The question is, if the virus is of natural origin, then why are the wild animals back in the markets? Should we not be banning those markets with thousands of people dying because of it? And what about the local residents claiming that they have been eating bats and wildlife for decades, but nothing's happened before? What are your thoughts on this, Dr. Wang?
Well, in China, you have laws and you have ways to get around laws. So the law that the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, put in place, they may seem to be very reasonable and they're good, but the CCP officials themselves would try to find ways to get around the laws, and they still do whatever they want. So basically, it's a lawless country, and whatever the CCP wants to do, and they can do it. So in terms of eating wild animals, and I don't understand why they do it. People are different, and apparently there are huge profits to be made. Some CCP officials benefited from the market financially. So I would assume that. But if it's a democratic country, then people can ask these questions and make the officials accountable for whatever is happening. But in China, you can only praise the CCP, and you cannot disagree with them. So I mean, I grew up in China. I knew the system, and people people just try very hard to not to cross the red line that the CCP put in front of them, and the red line is everywhere. For instance, the Dr. Li Wenliang's case, I assume all the audience would have heard about his case. He's just an ordinary person, and he's got a doctor degree and working in a prestigious hospital. He's just trying to live his life and be a middle class citizen of China. When he told his colleagues that there was this disease happening, and of course he will have to warn his friends and colleagues about this. Be careful. And even this, it's a red line for the CCP. And what happened to him, you all know. He actually died. Eventually, it's a tragedy. But that's how people live their lives in China.
So this is a bit of a segue into, let's talk a little bit about red lines. We have a question from Mark Wiseman. Once the CCP realized, and this will be, I think Josh will be the right person for this one. Once the CCP realized that it had bungled the containment of the epidemic and the extent of the economic damage that would occur, is it possible that the CCP used WHO to spread the contagion worldwide with the hopes of leveling the international economic playing field? Now, this is something that we've explored a little bit on American Thought Leaders. Josh, why don't you give us your take here?
Yeah, so actually there's a great timeline that was put together by the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, which shows that the lies the Chinese Communist Party was telling, based on dates, how these lies were repeated by Tedros at the WHO by date, and what the truth of the situation was at those exact same times, and shows that the Chinese Communist Party was lying to the world on many different fronts, lying to the world about how contagious this virus was, whether it can transmit from human to human. It's coming out now that Taiwan may have alerted the WHO in December that there was human-to-human transmission. WHO denied it, and then Taiwan made the letter public that they had sent to them, showing that people had to be isolated, and by that suggesting that the virus was contagious. WHO seemed to ignore a lot of warnings. They seemed to ignore information showing that, again, what the Chinese Communist Party was telling them wasn't accurate, but instead of looking into it independently, instead of investigating it, instead of, calling the Chinese Communist Party's narratives into question, they lied to the world at every single turn. And when China closed down Wuhan, when China started closing things down and they still had flights leaving the country, of course, had the WHO acted and warned that this was, a risk of a pandemic and there were problems of this virus spreading, had they been forthright, had they been honest, maybe a lot of countries wouldn't be in the situation they're in now.
Josh, a quick follow-up question from Darlene Silver, because this is exactly related to what you were just saying. Is it true that 5 million Chinese flew out of Wuhan the day before they locked down? Is it also true that these people flew all over the world as potential carriers?
Yes, that was accurate. That's what was reported, actually. And, of course, you could find public information on this. There were even some different research institutes that traced, a few thousand of the individuals who did leave at that time. The outbreak took place right before the Chinese New Year. And you have about 3 billion travel arrangements in China during that time. It was the worst possible time, and notably in the worst possible place, which is Wuhan, which is basically the transit hub of all of China. And so, yes, a lot of people left the city. It, again, happened right before the Chinese New Year, when people are traveling, going home, visiting friends and family abroad. And yes, that very likely contributed to the spread of this virus. And that's one of the reasons why the Chinese Communist Party's censorship of it, and even arresting individuals who tried warning the world about it, is being taken so serious. Because they're lying to the world about it, let people leave the country and let them travel to all parts of the world, and very likely could have contributed to this becoming a pandemic instead of a localized virus.
I've got a question related to Dr. Lin. It's from 3 Squad 56. And this is regarding patient zero. We've heard there's been a lot of speculation about patient zero. Our documentary goes into this a bit. What do we know so far at present about patient zero?
Based on reports by Chinese medical doctors and scientists, now they kind of officially saying that the patient zero will be one person that got infected in December 1st. But however, there are other studies saying that maybe other people got infected in the middle of November in Wuhan area. So it's still an ongoing investigation. There is no conclusive, really strong evidence, conclusive evidence to prove someone is patient zero, because it's even hard to check on which animal will be the intermediate host, because if it's happened naturally, if you can identify the patient zero, you usually can identify how did he get infected. So you could identify what kind of animal maybe this person, get interaction and got infected, right? So all these parts still mysterious in China. So I think this is the biggest question. Even though the Chinese government tried to blame, the patient zero could be come from other countries, but I don't think any of the phylogenetic analysis so far can prove that. And even though there are recent studies showing that the coronavirus have potentially different type based on genetic code analysis, but all these type A, B, C that are being reported, they all have cases from Wuhan showing more ancestral sequences. So I think the patient zero is still in China, but we just don't know who is the patient zero right now.
And a follow-up question to Josh. This is actually kind of the second part of this question. Patient zero, could they have been a researcher who was cremated? And I'm wondering if there's any further info on this.
So in our documentary, we tell the story of this intern who was working at this Wuhan laboratory, who a lot of people believe may have been the real patient zero. And we note how her information was scrubbed from the website of that laboratory, notably scrubbed very hastily, it seems, and done very sloppily, because they left some information of her on the website, even though they denied she was ever there. Now, some of the different news articles coming out actually corroborate our findings on that, corroborate her claims on that. And of course, we can't take exclusive credit for that, because her story was spreading around even before. It was in the public domain. But it does seem, at least in my analysis, that her story is a very plausible one. She may have been the real patient zero. And the story generally goes like this, that she was one of the researchers there. There were reports coming out that there were some accidents in the handling of bats, and there was cross-infection to a human. This intern, in particular, got out, passed it to her boyfriend, began spreading it around Wuhan unknowingly. And so, yes, we do tell her story in the documentary.
So let's jump to a bit of a different vantage point, and I think we'll have to talk to Dr. Wang about this, because this is kind of his specialization. The question is, the whole world is putting huge hope on vaccine development, and that the population could get vaccination, inoculated, and develop herd immunity. What is your view on the progress of vaccine development as we stand right now?
Well, let me answer this question first, and I have some things to say about the patient zero as well, if I may. In terms of vaccine development, vaccines by definition are going to be given to healthy individuals. So you want to protect people, you don't want to poison people. So the first and the most important thing for vaccine development would be safety. So you want to vaccinate a large part of the population with your vaccine And the last thing you want is actually causing disease to the people vaccinated. So safety is number one, and then efficacy. So the vaccine has to do the job. So stimulating immune response from people, and when they're infected by the virus, your immune system is ready. So you cannot escape this two thing at all when you develop your vaccine. So it takes time. You we will be extremely lucky if we have a vaccine by the time this time next year. From my experience, that's how long it would take to make sure it's safe and it's working. Of course, technology develop to be better, and you can speed up things, and so I mean it's just certain steps you cannot skip. I'm glad to see there are a lot of people putting a lot of effort in developing different kinds of vaccines against this virus. I hope I'm confident. I'm confident that sometime next year we'll see effective vaccines in the market. And going back to the patient zero thing, it's about the transparency, and basically when we deal with this virus, it's a common enemy of all human beings, and we should all put our efforts together to fight this. So it requires the entire scientific community, it doesn't matter you're in China or in the US, to put your mind and effort together, share the knowledge and share the information in 100% transparency fashion in order to fight this and defeat this quickly. What we see in China is that right after the lockdown, Wuhan and other places in China, they basically blocked all the information. In the earlier days, Chinese scientists actually were able to submit papers to international journals. But later on, they basically blocked everybody, and they have to go through certain censorship to be able to submit their information, which tells me there's something they have to hide, and that's exactly why it's important for the international scientific community to really practice academic freedom, and we just have to dig deeper to find the truth. But what I found troubling was that actually the scientific community was trying to be politically correct, and Nature has published apologies and so on and so forth. I get it. So some people actually discriminate against Chinese because the viruses come from China, and then we'll always see people like that. But that shouldn't prevent us from asking the questions and dig deeper to find the truth. I found the international scientific community's attitude in this sacrifice academic freedom for political correctness is very troubling.
I've got a question I'm going to lob over to Dr. Lin here. Essentially, Josh, you talked about how bizarre it is that this lab and this researcher isn't kind of front and center of the whole discussion, even for potential propaganda purposes. So we have here a coronaviral CV is asking, What factors or conditions would need to have been present to result in a virus escaping from the Wuhan P4 lab? What are the protocols? Has anybody alerted, or was it covered up?
So I think one important issue you need to point out that for study of the coronavirus, even for gain of function study, you only need a P3 facility. You don't even have to go to P4 facility. So for leaking this virus, there could be many situations. I remember when I was working on HIV, it was a P3 facility. There's one time actually we were using a centrifuge, to spin the virus through the tubes to pelleting the virus. But somehow one day, one tube got cracked inside the centrifuge, right? So fortunately, we see a little bit liquid come out of the centrifuge cover, so we didn't even open it. But it was like, this is a simple example. Even just simple failure of a tube can cause a leakage, right? And maybe if you're a technician, you didn't pay attention enough, you may get, infected, you may contaminate it yourself. So there are other potential management issues in this kind of lab, especially when you're doing with animal studies. So how do you handle the animal corpse and the environment, whether the technicians handling the animals following the proper procedures, precaution measures, right? So the technician may get infected. The animal corpse, if it's not treated, handled properly, maybe even sold to the wet market. These are the potential sources that you can spread the virus to the community as well. And so it's lab management issues, but that's why it's always high risk to study these highly pathogenic pathogens. It's really need a strict management for this handling of the virus for these highly pathogenic pathogens. And I also want to add a sentence regarding the vaccine development. So I saw Dr. Wang mention about the vaccine developments. I wasn't too optimistic, because the work being, for example, even in our Watery Institute of Research, the military been studying about dengue vaccine for the last 2-3 decades, but no vaccine so far. HIV been known for such a long time. We only have cocktail therapy. We don't have effective vaccines too. And SARS outbreak, in 2003, but so far we still don't have SARS vaccines. So even though for the last 10 years, there are so many different new platforms being developed for developing vaccine. But I think one fundamental issue is we still know very little bit about the immunologies, how virus evade immunities, even causing cytokines, or whether they are antibody-dependent enhancement of the virus infections. Because there are so many questions related to immunology still not answered. So I actually wasn't too optimistic about the vaccine development. People can hope for it, and in initial results, in the phase 1 result, we will see probably in a couple of months, we will see some initial results. But whether long term it will be a very effective vaccine or not, is still a big issue.
A question for Josh. There's been basically criticism around the documentary that it's kind of promoting the engineered origin theory, and I'm wondering if you could actually speak to that.
Yeah, so in the documentary, we of course look into this laboratory. We of course do look into evidence that maybe it was engineered because they were making chimeric viruses. They were creating new viruses at that laboratory, and they were working on altering natural viruses at that laboratory. All of that work was in fact being done at that laboratory. To write that off would not be responsible journalism. That is not to say, though, that we say that is the absolute case, but we do feel it necessary at a time when there is not a clear conclusion, at a time when we don't have answers, to at the very least show what was being done at that lab, the kinds of viruses that were present at that lab, and to show what may have happened. We of course need to acknowledge this. Now that said, it does, of course, they also had natural viruses there. They also had bat coronaviruses, notably, that Dr. Shi had written about, that could allegedly jump from a bat to a human without needing an intermediary species. And so it's also very possible it came from one of those bat viruses. We don't jump to conclusions. The documentary is not meant to jump to a conclusion on that. We do show evidence on both sides because that is responsible journalism, at least as far as I'm concerned.
So, Josh, you don't believe the documentary is making firm conclusions. What other work do you hope that this documentary will spur?
Well, part of the idea of this documentary, I understand, I mentioned this at the beginning, but I heard there were audio issues with me, so maybe I'll say it again. The idea of this documentary was not to come to a hard conclusion, because the fact is we don't have those answers right now. Until there's a real investigation, until we can get investigators on the ground in China into these labs, possibly, which does appear to be the general consensus now when it comes to international investigations on the origin, until we get those answers, we're not going to have a 100% answer. And so the idea with this documentary was just to look into what we can show, what evidence is there, what are the different trails of information we can follow that would lead us to having a better understanding of where this thing came from. Of course, we look into every claim. We look into the idea that maybe it came from this Wuhan seafood market. The evidence we show pretty much discredits that. And of course, that has been largely discredited already. We look into the idea that maybe it came from this P4 laboratory. And based on what we've seen, that may very well be the case. And based on information that has come out after we published this from other media that does corroborate our findings, that may very well be the case. We also look into the idea of possible bioengineering. We show evidence of the research that they were doing around this, that they were writing about it publicly. They had reports on it. We also show the possibility of a bioweapon. Doesn't mean we conclude that that is the case. It's just we, being responsible, are looking into the different claims, the different possibilities, and showing evidence that could support those or disprove those. My personal analysis, based on having done this documentary and looking into it, I personally think it was a natural virus. That's my personal conclusion. And that if the documentary, I know we did have individuals who, did say, they think it may be bioengineered. That's their opinion, of course. But as a responsible journalist, I'm not going to silence other people just because my conclusion is different from theirs.
So this is actually something I may ask more than one of the panelists, but I want to start with Dr. Wang. And it's just kind of talking about the general reality in China. We've discussed that a little bit and how that actually pertains to the statistics we get from there. I've been very disturbed by the fact that a number of Western media carry the Chinese statistics as if they're fact and so forth. And this is a question from Shailendra Ahur. How can the world know the exact numbers of COVID-19 infection and deaths from China? Because the world total numbers are super high compared to the epicenter, China. What do you make of this, Dr. Wang?
Well, this virus comes from China, and the Chinese Communist Party is the governing body, and they're responsible for this, and there's no other way to look at it. And the CCP has a history of censoring information, manipulating information. Basically their number one priority is their power, and whatever they feel that it's threatening to their power, they will do whatever to manipulate it. And they see this pandemic as something they have to control the information, and now you see that it's almost amusing. I'm using the wrong word to say it, because the world has suffered so much. And we still see the number in China being like a few thousand deaths. This is just impossible. And they see this as something like it's obvious, and their cover-up has basically backfired. So they jumped their number today by 50% of the death in Wuhan. And just they have no respect for facts. Everything is up for manipulation, And whoever in the West would believe in the numbers that released by the CCP would be a fool, stupid.
Thank you, Dr. Wang. Let's talk a little bit about the realities of these patients, about the cost. I'm going to lob this to Dr. Lin. From what we know now, will there be any long-term effects for the patients who are actually recovering from coronavirus?
Oh, there are multifaceted regarding this long-term effect. Depends on how severe people's symptoms develop when they got infected, right? Because many people, if they're having a severe disease, they may actually have damage to the lungs or multiple organs, right? They may come back from multi-organ failures, and so they will suffer for a long time for this, especially lung damage. Many people may live on, respirators for a long time. And also, if it's milder disease, people will still need support for oxygens. And also, even if you just have a very mild infection, it could become embedded in your systems. Overall, if we talk about whole population, it may be an endemic situations, right? So it may become seasonal, but it's hard to predict right now because this virus, quite often I feel, if you're in virology for a long time, I just feel a lot of time virus outsmart human beings. So this one is particular smart, and it how to evade system. It probably replicate in different efficiency in different human organs too. And so how do you handle this kind of outbreak with one simple vaccines? It's a big issue. So even people recover from it, these virus titer may researched maybe in a couple of months when the virus continue to mutate in your body in low titers. So one day maybe they have a breakthrough in certain organs as well. So it's hard to predict right now because I think so far we know very little bit about virus kinetics overall in different organs, in different part of the human bodies. This part of the study still are missing a lot. And also regarding about the immune response, how the virus evade immune response, and also how the virus titers and the kinetic was so high even before the paper showing symptoms. These all are mysterious questions. So it also have consequence for people who even showing like recovered, even they come out of the hospitals, but people don't know when this virus may resurge, and they may already suffer from different organ damage, and they maybe become immune compromised as well. So I think a lot of consequences we still need an investigation.
Okay, so we're actually nearing the end of our program here. I'm going to give everyone a chance to kind of sum up 1 minute time, and let's start with Dr. Wang.
Thank you, Yang. I'm really concerned about the fact that the WHO is actually towing the CCP line, and I'm also very concerned about the scientists, the doctors within the WHO organization, and actually in the West in general. We're scientists, and we respect the facts more than anything else. So if we start to sacrifice academic freedom because of whatever pressure from the CCP or the WHO, that's going to bring tragedy like this one to human race. I'm really concerned about this, and I hope people will pay special attention to academic freedom from now
on. Dr. Lin, your 1 minute.
Okay, I want to say congratulations to Josh and his team for the successful production for this documentary. And I think these documentary actually at least brought up people's concern about the origin of the virus. And I hope actually it can trigger investigation into Wuhan Institute of Virology, especially on the gain of function studies. Not necessarily saying this lab produced the SARS-CoV-2, but their intense study on the coronavirus with gain of functions features definitely need to be investigated. To me, this is ignoring biomedical ethics in the pursuit of scientific achievement. And it's just like another example, making human clones. So I think even these aspects definitely need world attention, need a thorough investigation.
And Josh, of course, you're the closer.
Yeah. So when it comes to this documentary, and I think maybe what I hope it could achieve, not just me, we had a good team on it, but what we were trying to really achieve was to just give people a package of information that will help them see through all this noise going around this virus. We, of course, we try to show evidence on every main track, and to show what would, if we can disprove it, we disproved it. If we had evidence for it, we showed it. And I think that is, of course, it's not conclusive, it's not absolute, and it doesn't show every single track that there is out there when it comes to everything we can find on the virus altogether. But when it comes to the origin of it, I think we have pretty much all the bases covered. And the articles now coming out in the different mainstream news outlets really do seem to be corroborating our findings. And so my hope is that people will be able to get a better idea of what we're dealing with, the kind of threat the world is facing right now. And hopefully, this documentary and the evidence we found and presented will help in the investigations into it, the further investigations into it.
Well, I certainly hope so as well. Before we finish up here, I just want to encourage everyone that's watching. This is going out via numerous live streams. If you're watching this via the Epoch Times front page and so forth, please be sure to basically log in to sign up for membership. We also have the Epoch Times app. It's actually one of the top apps in the Apple App Store, at least from what I'm aware right now. It's a very, very popular way to read the Epoch Times. At the same time, we're going out via YouTube, of course, via American Thought Leaders. If you haven't subscribed, please, like the video, subscribe to the channel. NTD, you could look that up, the Epoch Times Crossroads. Joshua Philipp has his own channel, extremely popular. He's talking about everything to do with coronavirus 5 nights a week, and it's actually, very, very compelling stuff. As well on Facebook, if you're watching via Facebook, I encourage you to basically like the channel, subscribe, and we are going to be looking forward to seeing more of you. We're going to be doing more of these live streams in the future, and it's actually a topic that we're going to be covering extensively. One more mention about the Epoch Times front page, that's epochtimes.com. If you're not familiar with it, epochtimes.com. Right on the front page, there's a link to another front page, which is all the most recent coronavirus info, including a lot of exclusive information from China. And on another track, there's a new channel that's grown almost exponentially called NTD China in Focus, which also 5 nights a week, it might even be more at this point, is delivering the top information basically via a video. And it's, again, it's grown 250,000 subscribers or more in just over 2 months, from what I understand. So please join us, please stick with us, and we'll alert you to more of these types of live streams as they come.